Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Radnor Township School District Finance Committee meeting for Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. First item on the agenda, introductions and administrative remarks. Mr. Pauling?
No, we have nothing for this evening.
Okay. Next item is public comment. This could take hours. Seeing none. That brings us to the third item on the agenda, which is the review of the minutes from the February 11th meeting. Committee members, everybody's
Review, no changes.
okay. Everything looks okay with that. That brings us to the fourth item, which are the action items on the agenda. And number one is approval of contracts, and it looks like budget approvals. Mr. Pauling, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can go through the action items in order. So the first item we have is an approval of a contract. It's MX Incorporated, but we've been working with this company as Informed K-12. We've been looking for a solution to reduce the amount of paper forms that we use starting with the business office and the HR office, but then hopefully expanding this out to other departments. So we've been looking for different companies, and a previous Radnor graduate reached out to me from this company, Informed K-12, with the product that they have. It's basically a form management software where we're looking to take, again, all those paper forms that pass between departments and are all, in hard copy form, and make a digital form out of those with an electronic approval process, a database where people can attach receipts if it's for a reimbursement. It goes through the approval process. And then our ultimate goal, and we're still doing some testing, is we'd be able to import information related to like reimbursements into our accounts payable system so that we can streamline the payment process. So I'll give you an example. The staff here in the district that have vision benefits have a vision reimbursement form. It's on a pink piece of paper. The form gets filled out by the employee, handwritten. It gets signed by them with receipts from their vision purchase or their exam receipt. It goes to the Human Resources Office where our benefits coordinator and Mr. Stitzel will review that, code the receipt on the form. They send that form up to us. I review it. I sign it. It goes to our accounts payable department for approval. So you've got a form going from, and this is just one example, going from the employee to two people in the HR office, up to the business office, to me, and then to our accounts payable. What this process will do is the employee will go on and fill out the form electronically. They'll be able to upload their receipts. Automatically, once they complete it, gets routed to our benefits specialist. They approve it, goes to Mr. Stitzel for approval, and then it comes to me for approval. The last step of that will then be getting that into our financial system, which we're working on testing, and it's just a matter of getting the data from their system in a format that will import into ours. I've talked to representatives from the Delaware County Intermediate Unit. They're using the software. I talked to someone I know at Capital Area Intermediate Unit in Harrisburg. They're using it as well. They're very pleased with the product. So the cost that's listed here is for the implementation and for the licensing for the remainder of this year and for next year, and includes an unlimited amount of forms. So we are going to start off with a trial number of forms between the business office and the HR department, and then we could expand this district-wide. So we would, contact technology department, teaching and learning. Anybody that's using a paper form currently, we could use this software to build a form and then use the electronic functionality in there to route it and get it to the right people without a piece of paper going through the inter-office mail and passing hands, 5 different places.
Or getting lost.
Or getting lost, yes, which does happen with the paper. So before I move on, is there any questions about that?
Is that cost built into the budget?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, so when we were talking about this, I did split it equally between the business office and the HR department's budget, so it is included. Yeah.
So I think this is a lot of money I really do, just to be moving forms around internally. So why isn't, all right, you scan your form in and send it to the people you need to send it to. Why isn't that sufficient? Like, that's electronic, it's off your desk, it gets transmitted electronically to the next person that needs to do it. What does this do for us? That, like, our current system of, you know, whatever we have established for our paperwork, how does this?
The biggest is time and efficiency, because anything that we have in paper that, especially within the Human Resources Department, if it needs to go into an employee's file, there's time it takes to scan that into the employee's file. Now it's already electronic, it can go in there automatically.
Okay, but I'm saying, why can't the employee fill it out and scan it, and then it's already electronic? Why can't we do it that way instead of a paper file here and a paper file there and whatever? Why can't we just change our policy or what our regulation to
Well,
just,
if they have a piece of paper and they scan it,
right?
then we need a method to sign it electronically, or then print it ourselves, sign it. And when you have some forms that go between multiple departments, it's the process of, okay, paper into scanner, then does
Right.
that get printed again? Or what's the method that we are going to sign that?
DocuSign.
But
Why
it's-
couldn't it be scanned in DocuSign, then it's all electronic from there
Because
on
we'd
out?
still have to convert all of those paper files into a format in Adobe that would allow us to do that.
No.
If you take a hard, like a
Not if you
form,
scan a form, if you scan a PDF into DocuSign, the person signs it, now it's electronic. The person signs it electronically. Nobody ever touches paper again.
But I think, like, DocuSign is a software.
Well, just for
Right.
example.
But that's an example of, so somebody purchased that software package.
Oh, I'm assuming we
that-
have that.
No, somebody has, like, purchased that to
A few-
create,
yeah,
to
a few
allow
of
that
us
to
have
have
that.
that ability
Oh.
to do that. So this software would create the ability so that it's not just an electronic attachment. There's actually tracking of the pieces. They can pull
Correct.
stats, they can find it, they can sign it in there. It's all of the software that makes this now, you can interface with it instead of just interfacing with an attachment that you're still having to print.
You would never have to print it. Once it's scanned in, it kind of already does. But you're saying not everybody has it.
correct.
That's the
Yeah,
problem.
if, to have that functionality in Adobe, we'd have to pay for that license in
For
Adobe
everybody.
for everybody as well.
I see.
Yeah, so what this also does is, see, Adobe, like Dr. Batchelor said, there's a tracking component. So once the employee submits that, they know where it's at in the approval process as well. So they can go in and see if it's waiting for human resources. And in the example I gave, if there's a missing attachment, then we can send a message electronically back to the employee that says there's a receipt that's not included. They can upload that and send it back over. So there would be some cost to streamline this. There's also storage costs, because we'd either have to, all these paper forms that we're already passing back and forth, we either need the time to scan them and store them electronically, or they go in a paper file. And then we've got cost of where we're storing that. So, it's substituting Adobe, but there's a lot more functionality to it. As well as on the back end, like I said, with integrating those forms. And with this being unlimited, we can create new forms as well. So if we have something that we that we don't currently have, we can use this tool to create a new form as well and put it through the workflow for any department. So again, this would be district-wide. It's an unlimited number of forms that we could utilize.
Brian, I totally get the need and the functionality. Are there other companies who are doing this? What's the competition look like, and how does that affect our pricing?
We talked to a few, and they were more focused on document retention versus the workflow and the functionality of it. So after attending the ASBO National Conference last year and looking at different vendors there, I reached out to a few, and their product was more, well, here's your documents, here's a great storage and repository system, but I hadn't seen anything with the functionality similar to this, where it's got that streamlined workflow. So everything else, and we had 3 or 4 different interviews with the business office team and HR with some of these other vendors, and their product was primarily retention versus workflow.
Great. And you're comfortable with Inform K-12 as a company? Is it a startup? Is it an established company?
They're established because they are working with other clients, and I did check references. The intermediate unit been using them for a while, capital area, and their business administrators much more involved in technology than I am, and he gave a glowing review of it, and I know in his role up there, he uses it more on the back end, whereas ours would be more, the upfront, just the forward facing. He deals with more of the IT side of it. But it's all web-based as well, so it's not taking up storage capacity or anything like that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
When you buy it, are we gonna own this like forever for as long as we want, or is it like a subscription kind of thing?
So the functionality is, but we would own the documents. So if we would decide to forego that, we could still keep the documents, but we would lose the workflow functionality. We would still keep our documentation at the back end.
Okay.
Okay. For budgets, we have the intermediate unit budgets that were submitted to us. There's 3 budgets. I do want to note a correction for the technical high school budget. We had an incorrect amount on the agenda, which I have since changed. We had last year's amount at $287,598. Last year's cost was actually $301,581. So there's a decrease in the technical school budget because they go on a 3-year average of student enrollment. We had a couple high years this year. The enrollment went down, so on the 3-year average, it reduced our cost for the technical school. We have the intermediate units general fund budget, which there's no increase there. There hasn't been an increase in several years. That goes to cover administrative costs, joint purchasing, fiscal management. Our IDEA funds are run through the IU. We do our joint purchasing for fuel and for other commodities through the IU. So that's our portion of the administrative budget for the intermediate unit. And then the special education budget, it's a slight increase from last year, but that number is an estimate at this point. It's all based on services that we use. So it's an estimated budget up front, and then we reconcile that at the end of the year. It's usually fairly close, but as we may have students coming in and out that require different services, that could impact that. So that's an estimated budget on the student services that are known at this time. And those will be on the board agenda as roll call votes, so they will be under action items because they require a roll call. So if you see it on there, that's the reason for that.
Right. Anybody? There's a lot here.
Yeah, the attachments for each document were included in the packet, so I just gave you a 30,000-foot view of what each of those covers and the cost differences. But if you have any specific questions, I can answer them, or I can get back to you on that.
So I am curious about the revenue, the way they report it.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be page 5, for example, of this would be the intermediate unit general fund budget.
Does that have the like the donut chart on it?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
No, well, hang on. The revenue chart. I guess it's more page 6 and 6 through 8. It lists the districts. No, I'm looking, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Page 9 lists the districts.
Yep.
So what are they listing here? This would be contracted service.
Yeah, so
Okay.
for this one in particular, the 72,893.51 for Radnor, that is our portion. And again, this specific budget for the IU, the district shares to cover those administrative costs. And then that's just one portion of their budget. So their total district contributions are about $886,000. So that's just one portion of their overall budget, where their total revenue is about $11,900,000. So they receive revenue from different sources like we do. They earn investment earnings. They get they provide billable services that they receive money back from, rental facilities, technology revenue, and then they get state sources for Social Security and pension reimbursement. And so that's the portions of their budget that make up the 11.9 million. IUs work a little different than the school districts. Most of their revenue is made up of the services that they are billing back. So it's more of a business type model than what our school districts are, where we have real estate tax revenue and different state subsidies and things of that nature.
Well, I'm just trying to balance it back. So it shows the contributions from all the districts.
Yep.
And so that's 885,000.
Yeah.
So where is that on the,
If you go to page 6,
right, show me
it's
where
the
I'll
second
find
line,
that.
6947, receipts from member districts.
Okay.
If you look on the last column, it's the 885,694.
Okay. And so that is the only payment from Radnor?
Correct. Yeah, the other services we would pay for, so like for special education, if we're getting those services directly. Like for special ed, we would pay for those services directly. This is just, like I said, for the administrative costs for the services that we are utilizing the IU for in that capacity. Again, it's mostly fiscal, joint purchasing, things like that.
Wait, say that again. This thing on page 9 is only for like the consortium costs?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
for,
okay.
yeah, it's for, I think there's a brief description on page, if you go to page 1,
Yep.
and the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth bullet point, the operating budget provides administrative services required for the joint purchasing, fiscal management. So that's our share of that. So
Okay.
of the $11 million that they receive in total from other sources, the district's contribution in total of all the member districts is 885,000.
All
So,
right.
you know, less than 8% of their total overall budget. And then our share of that is the $72,000.
Right, but then that's not contracted services. That is the consortium costs. So then if we have students there, it's someplace else in this
Correct.
revenue.
Yeah.
Where would it be?
Yeah, that's where they break out their budget. So in the special education budget, you'll see they have that revenue categorized differently there. So under the special education budget, they'll have a separate revenue and expenditure breakout. So they have.
But it's not broken out by district.
I believe the special education may not be in the summary, but each district gets an estimated cost of services from the intermediate unit that's included in the revenue. So
Yeah.
again, that one's more variable because it's based
Right.
on specific student needs.
Right, so we're not going to see that in this.
Not in the general budget, no.
Okay. And so which line item would it be in on this revenue page of the 11 million?
It's the second line.
No, but that's contracted service. No, that's,
It's the
consortium.
special ed is not included in that. It's its
Oh.
own budget. That's why they have different documents, and we approve separate budgets for each one.
hang on though, this is the, gotcha, general operating budget, okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the IUs, like I said, their accounting's
Gotcha.
a little different also because like where we have funds, they have program budgets. So they have the intermediate unit, the technical school, the general and operating, whereas we have, you know, a fund for the general fund. We have a capital reserve fund. We have a food service. So it's similar, but it's different.
Got it.
Got it?
All right, anybody else hung up on anything? All right, and I found that in the, I'm now in the special programs. And I see our part of that on page 1.
Yeah.
All right. And it is what?
Yeah, for this.
This is thousands, right? So just 274,000?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, those are fairly consistent from year to year. because we have very specific services that we utilize the intermediate unit for. So Mrs. Lesage will kind of has that all plotted out of what services, so it's a fairly consistent cost from year to year.
So do we have, forgive me if it's right up front and I missed it?
Yeah.
An overall increase for them?
For the special education,
Well, for the two parts that we pay.
well, the general operating budget is flat. There's no increase there.
Right, you said that.
Yep, the technical budget is a decrease because of the student enrollment, and then there's about a $4,600 increase in the special education estimated budget. Again, that may
what-
change slightly based on our actual usage of
Oh, but that's
services.
just for us, so
Yeah.
we don't have it overall for them.
It's in the documents. I'd have to find where it's at on
Okay,
what their
I-
budget is. I think their operating budget remained the same.
Okay.
Well, let me rephrase that. Our portion of that remained the same. Their budget has increased, just like any other budget. They have increased costs. They haven't passed it on to us because they've made it up through other revenue sources. But there were increases noted in the general budget, mostly in salary and benefits, which again, like us, it's their biggest cost.
Right.
Okay.
Is this going to be a roll call vote also?
Will be, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
all three of them, so I'll roll through them quickly at the meeting next Tuesday.
Okay.
And then the final items in the action items are our donations. We have a donation from the Special Olympics of two $500 stipends. We have a donation of some musical equipment, and then a generous donation of $10,000 from the Ithan PTO to utilize for one-time expenses, namely furniture, equipment type items that they could utilize within the building.
Unrelated, last year, the Radnor PTO, elementary school, did a gazebo. Is that up?
Yes, yep. So when you pull in, right before you turn into the parking spaces, it's on the right-hand side on the front corner of the building.
Awesome.
Yeah, it looks really good, yep. Yeah.
I just want to generally thank the donors. We really appreciate it
Absolutely.
out there. Thank you.
Okay. Should we move to item 4.02 for the community college?
Yes, sorry, moving
No
on.
problem.
I'm shuffling papers up
That's
here.
okay, I got you. So
Thank you.
we have some reappointments for 3 positions at the Delaware County Community College. We had some vacancy appointments that we had on a previous agenda. These are for continuation appointments for the candidates that are listed there. We usually run this through the Finance Committee, I believe, because Ms. Solomon is our representative to the community college. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but we'll have that on the agenda for next week for those appointments.
Wait, I have attached to mine something about a reappointment for somebody to the intermediate unit. Wait a minute. Reappointment of the 4. Reappointment of 4 people to the community college. And then I have
Oh, you know what? I think that was just from an old attachment. We copied an agenda item over, so under the administrative content,
Okay.
you can ignore that attachment. It should be under the public content. And I'll go in and I can
All right,
delete that
so-
right now. That's just a carryover. When we work in board docs, it saves us time from typing. We copy and paste over. We just miss deleting the old attachment. Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what my question is, we don't have any more information. I know some of these people, but I don't know that the other board members do. Do we have any more information about the reappointments?
Whatever they sent is what is attached, yeah. So they provide us the information, so that's what we have at our availability to provide to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And, okay. Any questions on that? Okay. So the next item is a update on the audit. Thank you. My screen froze up, so I couldn't remember if the audit or the budget was next, so thanks for saving me there. So I'll give you an update where we're at. So we had a representative from Witham, our auditing firm, at our board meeting last month to present information on our draft audit. We're still working to finalize the audit with them. I have attached a copy of the latest draft that we received. Ms. Klaus and I have reviewed it several times to make sure that the numbers are accurate. As of last Tuesday, we received some information that they were looking to do some additional technology related testing, which Dr. Hand assisted us with, and asked for some additional trial balances from us, which is basically our numbers from our system. So I did receive information from our auditor today that he is working on our final copy and it going through the final testing. I cannot give you an estimated time of arrival on that. I'm in continuous conversation and contact with our auditor about that. And so once we have the final version, we will get that out to everybody. Again, the numbers are solid. We've had our numbers solid since December. We filed our annual financial report with the state. That's important for us to meet so that we don't lose subsidy and Dr. Batchelor doesn't get threatening emails that they're going to revoke his licensing. So we make sure we took care of that. You're welcome. So we're really just waiting for the rest of the audit. There's some additional testing that they go through, some internal controls. They did have conduct their interview with Ms. Dunn as the board president, so that did take place. So we should be at the last phase of this to get this wrapped up, but I do not have a definitive date from them. We're really at their mercy and waiting for them to get this concluded.
Can you say a little bit more about the technology testing? What does that entail and why is that?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Hand because he received the questions as our technology director. And thank you for being here, so you can jump in on that because I didn't see the questions. They went directly to him. Yeah.
All good. So they had requested some more information about some of our technology practices, procedures, and some security measures that we have in place. It's part of other audits that we do, so we had some back and forth with them about the interconnection to a financial audit, and making sure that any data that we give them was protected as well, because that's sensitive information, making sure that's not going to appear in public reports and how they're using that. So we were able to provide them with some of the additional information that was requested last week.
Anything stand out to you that is like a missing piece or you feel good about?
Not at all. I think everything was yes, yes, yes of things that we're doing.
And I will jump in. I've been involved with PASBO on their audit committee. We had our auditing firm there ask the PASBO staff when they conduct their audit about certain internal controls related to technology. The issue with this is that they asked us last Tuesday. This could have been asked like in September or October. So I think it's just part of the ongoing process that we've been working through this year. But I thank Dr. Hand for working with me, and we were both cautious as to the scope and scale. You know, just him by nature and me having lived through a cyber attack at a previous district, like we try to be very protective of what we have on our network, what security measures we have in place. So we were very thorough with them about what they were asking for and deliberate on our responses to ensure that that was kept secure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I want to pull this back, big picture. How late are we now with this process?
Worst case, 2 months. We've had our audit done in prior years in November. Last year, we were a little late, and we had it approved in January, and that was after we went through a financial conversion on our side.
Right.
So we delayed it a little bit last year, but it still was finished by January. The AFR was filed before the holiday break. We had the wrap-up and the final testing and had everything completed to the board and approved in January. So it was really shortly after the holiday break that we had it all wrapped up and out for approval in January. You know, as they spoke about at the prior meeting, there had been some staffing difficulties and some things occurring on their end. So just moving forward, we're evaluating our entire audit procedures and structure, and we will, you know, have some more information to follow up with the board after, you know, after we go through that process.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody? Oh, bite my tongue. Okay.
No. Yep, so the next item I have is an update on the budget, and I'll keep this relatively brief just because I will be doing a full presentation to the board at next Tuesday's meeting, which we've done the last few years, as I've done, you know, instead of just through the committee. Since this is one of the board's biggest responsibilities, we feel it's appropriate to have a presentation around this time for the entire board to review everything. I did give each of you a hard copy. It's a condensed version of the budget book that we created last year, but it's updated for the numbers from our preliminary budget in February. I locked in on those numbers, and the budget will be changing, but instead of giving you a new copy of this every week as we make updates and changes, this is what our first iteration was, and then I'll just provide updates as we move along. Since we provided that to the board at last month's meeting, where we had about a $600,000 deficit in the budget, we've been able to make some adjustments. So we've been able to reduce the deficit down to a little under $200,000, about $198,000. So there's still more work to do, which this is the process we go through every year. We kind of throw the kitchen sink at the first budget, and then we go through and we make a thorough review of the budget, some assumption changes. For example, just the environment that we're in right now, with inflation ticking up again, there seems to be a decrease in the projection on rate cuts. We've kind of backed off on our investment earning assumption that was going to continue to decrease, which I made an assumption to kind of keep that flat to where we're at this year. And just kind of see how that goes. So I will go through the full presentation next week. The budget book that you have and will be posted online for next week's agenda item, as well as the presentation, and we'll get that posted on our business office webpage as well. It's a scaled-down version of what we created after the final budget approval last year. It's just the general fund, but it has detail on our last few years of revenues, actual numbers, and the current year budget, as well as the proposed budget, and detail on the expenditures that are broken out by our function, which is our major categories as far as instructional costs, special education costs, administrative costs, as well as what we call an object level, which is salaries, benefits, supplies, and others, which include debt and those things. So we have that detail, which we provided in the budget book, updated with our actuals from 23-24, as well as the budget for next year. And then I'll have the presentation ready for next week. Just as a preview, you know, I think our budget's fairly consistent from last year to this year as far as programmatic things that we have included in the budget. I don't want to call it status quo because we're constantly doing things, but nothing that's going to have a significant budgetary impact, other than phasing in the remaining debt for the Ithan project, which is all included in there. I want to focus, and I'll talk a lot more next week about some global things that we're looking at in the budget. The state budget situation, we're getting a very limited amount of new money from the state. And the state's not in great financial shape right now. They have a projected $3 billion deficit in their current operating year, and potential $6 billion deficit in next year's budget. So hard to get new education funding when the state has a $3 to $6 billion projected deficit in the operating budget. So I'll talk about that. I'll also give you some detail on our federal funding sources, what we get, how much, what we use them for, to give you an idea of those things, and then we can talk a little bit about, if we're hearing anything. I think for the most part, we're just kind of in a wait and see, but I'll have some information on that. So, depending on any additional news that we get, we'll have information if we need to make any decisions. The good thing with good or bad is that we get limited amount of funding from the federal government, much less than most other school districts. So I think should something happen and we stop receiving federal funding for whatever reason, we can certainly weather that storm. We'd have to find a way to make that up somehow, but definitely from a percentage and a dollar wise, we're in a much better shape than what a lot of other districts are to have to pivot if we need to. So I'll have more information on that next week, as well as some of the details of what are in the budget itself.
So am I reading this correctly? You're still at 4.1% for this budget?
4% as of now, yes.
Yeah,
As of now.
okay, I think I've expressed this. I am not comfortable with that in light of all the uncertainty going on and uncertainty within our taxpayers for sure as well. Just my philosophy on this is to just slow and steady is the way to fund schools. And so even 3% perking along is a lot, but, I don't believe that we should live beyond our means. We certainly don't want to be one more governmental agency that is showing a huge deficit because we got ahead of ourselves. So that's...
No, I think what we have now, again, is there's some refinement that needs to be done. But I don't think there's anything in this budget that we would consider frivolous. We still have some staffing reviews to go through. And so, there's definitely some things that we can adjust. I mean, we're in March. We have till late May to make any adjustments on this. But this is the same situation we were in last year. Our Act 1 increase was 5.3%. We trimmed that down to under 4%. So we have time, and we will go through that process to see where we can get the final landing point on.
I mean, just so there's no surprises, I've said this before, I'm hoping to come in around 3%. I think that's very fair to everybody. So just, that's where I am on this.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any change on the Act 1 index projection as things change for the state?
Not yet. So the state budget doesn't necessarily impact the Act 1 directly. It's based on economic factors. So there's a statewide average weekly wage and then an employment cost index for K-12 schools. So they take the two indices, which it's also a little bit, it lags, the data lags by about a year or so. So that's what they use. So the projections that I have still have us from 4% this year to 3.6 to 3.2 to 3.1%. So, yeah, would be going down. That's what the projection is. So that kind of sets our guardrails. We can't go above that unless we go out to vote or referendum. But again, I'm comfortable that we can present a balanced budget, within the Act 1 index number. And whereas many other schools are having budgeted deficits, they utilize fund balance to cover the difference. So we've had the opportunity to present balanced budgets over the last few years and being under Act 1. So it's a good position to be in, but I hear your point. But when we, I'll give you the number. You're forcing my hand. I'm going to give away the first 5 minutes of the movie here. We're getting a net increase of about $31,000 in state funding, which is 0.17% of an increase in our state funding. Now that's excluding the pension and Social Security reimbursement. That's based on our costs, but just in our subsidy amounts. We're getting $31,000. And part of that is netting a decrease because we received $24,000 in charter school transition funding for this year that they've eliminated as a line item from next year's budget. So that we received $24,000 one time. It's not in this year's budget. So that's being netted off of that increase because it's going away. So that's where we are in an unenviable position to be in where we are so heavily reliant on our community to make this up because of the lack of funding from a state and especially a federal level here in our district.
So just for my colleagues, why I stick to that is because we have these long-term contracts and most of our expenditures are within contracts for labor services. And knowing that inflation is coming down, if we are just slow and steady where we think inflation's going to be, and we hold the line when it's a little bit higher now, so then we're in these long-term contracts. If it then goes below, sort of a 3%, which it has in the past. I was on the board when it was 1%, but yet we have 5-year contracts that were at 5%. So I've lived through this. That's why it's just better to slow and steady. We've got long-term financing on our construction, and so it's better to sort of tighten the belt now than if you allow it to go up now, then everyone in the district thinks, oh, we can get 4% increases or 5% increases. And so it's just better to keep it consistent so everybody knows where we're headed and it's all out in the open that way. And that way households can plan for it too. We don't want it jumping around for our taxpayers either. But there are differences of opinion on that.
And just that, slow and steady consistency also is the argument for, we were 3.9 last year, correct? So we were at a 3.9 last year. We've been in that range. We will be forced in the next 2 or 3 years to be lower. I can't imagine us at a point where we're looking at being at a referendum. So we do need this budget year to take into account all that we are trying to do within our capital as well, because we will be lower in the future. So that argument kind of builds, it cuts for both sides in a sense, because we have tried to not take advantage of just going to the index because the index is high. I think we've done I think the board has been really good stewards of the tax dollar and, has tried to keep that as consistent as possible.
What is the percent you guys are talking about?
So there's an index that was created in 2006 by the state legislature. It's called the Act. It was created through Act 1, so we call it the Act 1 index. And it's basically an economic calculation of 2 economic indicators. We take the average of those 2. It's school costs and school wages, and it comes up with an average number. So it limits the amount that we can increase our real estate millage rate every year by that percent. So this year it's 4%. So if you have a house that's assessed at, let's just say $1 million, because it's easy math in my head, you would take the $1 million times the millage rate, which is a little over 15 this year. Your tax bill would be about $15,000 based on that. That 15 in the millage rate, we can't increase that rate annually by more than 4%.
So
This
to,
year.
to help you out a little bit, that's all charted on page 65 in your budget book.
Thank
You'll
you.
see the list of the Act 1 indexes. And so for what I was referring to, you'll see that for almost since its inception, it's been hovering around 2%. It did get higher the last few years, but I don't think that we should follow that because we need these long-term contracts to be within where we know it's going to go, which is, I believe, coming down. So, and you can see on here that it hovered around 1.5 and then up to 2.5 and then did get high. So I'm talking about what's on page 65. Yeah. And that's that last column is that basically Act 1 indexes the limit that we can raise our budget without going out for referendum.
Yep.
So I'm trying to say even 3% is generous if you look at the history of it. Of course, nobody knows what their future holds financially. I'm not saying I do either. I'm just saying cautiously I think we should heed, being conservative on that.
So you can't go above the Act 1 index?
Correct.
But you don't want us to be right up at the Act 1 index even if it's going up?
Correct.
Yeah.
I think that we should just fund, because our expenditures each year are not just that year. What I'm saying is they're usually tied to 5-year labor contracts. So it's much better for everyone if we just, some years it might be lower, but our contracts are higher. I've lived through that, where our labor contracts were much higher than what we were allowed to raise our budget. So there might be years where 3% is above, but certainly not 4%. I don't believe, then I think we would be way above where it's going to be. That's just what I think is going to happen. And I think there's way too much uncertainty in the economy to take a risk like that. That's my
I
opinion.
think we're in a unique situation now because of the Ithan Elementary School project. So if you in the budget book, look on page 65. That has our historical increases from Act 1. The middle school was built around 2007, and you can see we had millage increases of 5.83%, 5%, 7%. So higher millage increases during a large construction project. You're borrowing money, you have to pay that back. So the way that our debt is structured, we're building that into the budget. We built the majority into the budget last year. We've built the remaining amount into that this year. So it's really to phase in the millage so that we can make the repayments on the debt that we're taking out for the new building. So all things being equal, if we weren't building a new building, we would be at in a lower number from the overall budget. But then we'd have to find the money to renovate the building. So, there's a cost there regardless. So I think the best way I can look at that is if you look at the regular operating years, we've been consistent, and over the last several years, we've been at that 3% range. I think we're kind of in a similar situation back to where the beginning of Act 1, where when we were trying to phase in millage for the middle school project. It's a similar type of situation of what it was back then.
And for us, $1 million is about 1%.
Yeah. Pretty close, yeah.
So, and we need to build about another $1 million of debt into the budget. When you look back, though, at this history, I think it is good to look at this history. The last 3 years, we've tried to stay under the index. I think I think the board should be proud of, and thanks to the business office, where we've been.
Oh, I would definitely want to give accolades to the administration, because you have held the line, the last few years when you could have gone much higher. But then there were years where we were much higher than the index because we were locked into contracts. Like if you look at, kind of 2016 through 2020. So there again, it does bounce around, but the point being, it's better to just stay steady and constant.
And keep in mind too, when you look at the 16 through 20, some of that doesn't show, we qualified for exceptions in those years. We haven't had exceptions lately. So sometimes those exception dollars that we qualified for, whether it was because of special education or the two that we've qualified.
Pension was one, the special ed were the
but
two bigger ones.
We have not qualified for those.
There was some phased-in debt, but I'd have to see if we actually qualified for that. Some did, some didn't.
So we haven't qualified for those. So those did allow us to be a little bit, in a different spot because there was exception dollars because of dollars we had spent the year before. But you can see why, the history of the Act 1 index is when you go all the way back to 93, 94, and you can see where, how school boards at the time, and I'm sure you could look back and find, projects or different things that contributed to those, to some of those spikes. To your argument, I think, which is a good argument, we actually have been able to keep and really are, in reality, staying pretty level all in all.
Yeah.
And the debt service for Ithan, we're going to be in year 3, right?
Yes, so
So-
we borrowed 10 million in the first year at the end of 2023. Borrowed another 10 million at the end of 2024.
Okay.
Once we see where we land on the project, we have a planned borrowing at the end of this calendar year and then at the end of the next 2 calendar years for cash flow purposes for the construction phasing. So that's all built into those estimates, and I'll frequently reach out between our estimates with PFM, our financial advisors, to rerun scenarios. The market in that world is staying fairly steady. The rates are still at about 4%. We do get some advantageous rates depending on the market because of our bond rating and what other bonds are out there. So nothing that's scaring me on that side of things right now, but, you know, we're a little bit a ways from when we would do that next borrowing. But that's also part of the big puzzle of making sure we don't eat into our reserves too much to do capital projects, because those are all the things that Moody's looks at when they evaluate our credit rating. We wouldn't want that to decrease right before we go out to a couple huge borrowings, because that will definitely cost us money in the long run as well.
So just to editorialize a little further, you can see why they put in Act One, right? Yeah. Because that's what districts were doing
Yeah.
back in the 90s. And so that kind of is what led to it. It makes our job a little bit easier, not easy, but
And the final thing I'll say is that as we've been negotiating our collective bargaining agreements, you know, I will share the Act One projections. I share the budgetary. I'm very transparent about that to show them, and I always refer to it as the levers, right? We don't have many levers to pull to generate revenue. It's our real estate taxes. Some of the other things fluctuate. We're not getting new federal money. We're not getting additional money from the state. So that's all a conversation that we have at the table so that we can set the framework of, when, you know, when we bargain with our staff members, you know, these are the constraints that we have from a financial standpoint. And we've communicated that with, you know, the different groups that we've bargained with over the last few years and shown them where these projections are leading to. So, you know, we're not looking at this number going up and us being at a 5% like we were last year. It's coming down. So we have to work within, you know, the constraints that we have and have those conversations with them. Yeah.
and our district is really good about understanding this now, because we've had Act One for so long that people know how this runs. And I guess a good part of it was the administration, you know, working with the unions and everybody working together to try to get the best situation for everybody.
Okay, so more to come next week.
All right, that brings us to new business. Any new business, committee members? That last item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none at this time, our next meeting will be April 8th at 5 p.m. in the ground floor conference room at the Administrative Building.